Police officers have read it. Have you ever had an all units call? And if so, what happened? Former military police here. Air Force Security Forces, to be specific. I was patrolling base housing doing some LE training. I had been on station less than a year, and we heard a gunshot. We called it in immediately, and started heading in the direction we heard it from. Those houses were duplexes, and the neighbors called it in as well. BDOC, dispatch, send us, another police unit, and then the entire external response force. This was on a nuke base, so even things that don't actually have any impact on the nuclear mission totally have an impact on the nuclear mission. We had 19 total people on scene within about 3 minutes. As the first ones on scene, my post leader and I were already at the door when the rest of them showed up. I was thankful for them showing up when they did, because we were about to breach the door and go in just the two of us. We were told to hold for 30 seconds while the RF team got set up. Now we had a full stack and breaching equipment. I made a fist and thumped my helmet, signaling the breacher, who came up with his Halligan tool. My leader was number 2 in the stack, so she had to throw the flashbang. One of the RF guys passed it up from somewhere in the back of the stack, and as soon as the breacher had the door open, she tossed it in. All it did was scare the shit out of the dog. Only the husband was home, as his wife was deployed. He was sitting in the dining room on a chair with an SKS in his lap. I was maybe a pound or so of pressure away from pulling the trigger on my rifle when I realized that this dude's head was not fully intact. The SKS was only in his lap because the sling got caught on his arm after he pulled the trigger. As we cleared out the rest of the house, per procedure, I had my non-firing hand basically stuffed in my mouth to stop myself from puking. The dude's wife had sent him pictures and video of her cheating on him multiple times and telling him she wanted a divorce. He thought there was no other way out, so he shot himself. The only good news from that day is that we actually had picture and video evidence to use to charge her with adultery. OC, like an Air Force version of the FBI, pulled her out of her deployment and got her back on station, and we charged her with everything we could, including Articles 92, 107, 125 which covers sodomy, and 134. She was stripped of all rank, forfeited all pay, went to confinement, and was dishonorably discharged after her 11 years of service. The neighbors adopted the dog. He was a good boy and nobody wanted to see him go to the pound. If you are feeling like hurting yourself or someone else, please reach out for help. You aren't alone, and you don't deserve to feel like it. Call someone, text someone, DM someone, whatever. Just reach out. Nobody needs to suffer alone. Cheers. Edit. Adultery and sodomy are both illegal under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I did not create said manual for courts martial, though I, as with all duty personnel, am required to abide by it. I know that making blowjobs and bud stuff illegal is archaic, but it is what it is. Also, don't cheat on your spouse. End the relationship properly if you can't hold up your end of the bargain, or they aren't holding up theirs. Cheers. Not an officer, but I'll share one of my buddies. He was an older gent who has passed on now, but if it had been a thing when he was younger, this would have been a top tifu point. When he was still new, he worked in a larger city. They had just gotten the shoulder mix. You know, the ones every cop has now mounted up by their mouth, so they can call in easier. When new to them, they wore the cord in front of their shirts, always in the damn way. And great handles when people wanted to wrestle. Jimmy was called one night to a bar brawl. He strolled into the bedlam almost over. He was a rookie, always getting the sheet to tell, so he was becoming famous among his department for ruining his uniforms. To the point he was having to come out of pocket to replace them. He walked into a vet telling him to cuff everyone still here, they'll sort them out later. Jimmy grabs the closest guy, they struggle a little, and go down to the ground. As they do, rip, Jimmy splits his pants clean up the backside. Knowing he's going to be the butt of jokes anyway, he turns his head to announce to the other officers, well, that's another uniform down. And keys his mic. Base here's uniform down. So does everyone else in the county. The radio explodes with chatter, but the 3 cops at the bar already have their hands full, so they turn down their radios. Foo-2. Base decided to roll everything with lights to the scene. Jimmy said they were glad of the help when the first few cars rolled up, but they just kept coming. He was known as Jack the Radio Ripper till he transferred point minor reprimand, and he still had to pay for the pants. Former Royal Canadian Mounted Police here in a small tourist town was working on a regular midweekday shift when we received a dispatched call for a bomb threat in the industrial/commercial sector of the town. We all went there, called in the bomb squad, the dogs, got people out of the area, and so on. We were doing roadside when we got another call that the local bank's silent alarm was turned on. Now, we are in Canada, in a tourist town. Things are usually relatively calm, but this was absolutely chaotic. We got the all-unit call. They call our neighboring detachment to help. We all split and head to the bank. We arrive, around 20 some patrol cars all around, there to see all bank employees bounded and gagged, smoke everywhere from smoke bombs. We realize very quickly that the bomb threat was the diversion. We immediately got a barlow out to get the 3 males, identified by the bank staff, including a former bank employee. We get the barlow out to CPIC, got words to airports and border crossings. We managed to catch 2/3 of the guys. The last one flew back to his home country, was in Canada on a student visa. We remained on high alert for days after this, looking for the third guy. Canadian authorities worked with their colleagues from the other guy's country to get him extradited almost a year later. In the end, as I recall, about $130,000 were missing and never recovered. Point for most of us, it was the first time we had a bomb threat and/or a robbery. First time we were guarding an area, expecting to be shot at from an unknown location. The robbers were reported to have AK-47 type looking weapons. Edit 1. Barlow. Be on the lookout for /CPIC. Canadian Police Information Center. Edit 2. Changed deported by extradited. NB. I won't name the town or the country involved. So, I interned at the local PD at a time when all stations received new radio devices. The new devices looked a bit like old cell phones and had a bright orange panic button on top. It was meant for situations where, for instance, a single police officer was attacked and needed help. Pushing that button resulted in all communication on the standard channel 1 being turned to one-way communication only, so all units would listen to what's going on wherever the panic button was pressed, and an automatic all 3 units call. All other units had to switch to the much weaker channel 2 to communicate, but channel 2 only allowed one device to speak, so either dispatch or car 1 or car 2 etc. could talk, but not multiple people at the same time, like on channel 1. To disable the panic mode, you had to push the bright orange button in a certain way. Think of holding it for 3 seconds followed by 4 quick pushes. It could not be done remotely. This happened in a rather large city, where some police stations are closed at night, usually the ones in the suburbs, where few calls come in. That night, an older PO closed down the remotest station in the suburbs, and decided to shut off the radio devices. You guessed it, he pushed the panic button on top, because he thought that's where the devices were to be turned on and off. Without realizing what he did, he locked the station and went home. Since it was the first day of using the new radio devices, quite a few officers were unsure how to turn to channel 2. Basically, all communication was blocked. Cue panic everywhere with frantic cell phone calls to dispatch, and dispatch trying to figure out who closed that station, and thus had one of the only keys to open it, so the panic mode could be disabled. This unintentional all units call turned into an actual no units can call, though quite a few units were busy trying to resolve the situation. I was doing a ride along in college in a fairly small city in Gap when we got an all available units call. The address came in, the lights and siren went on, and we were hauling ass at about 120 miles per hour across town. I had no idea where we were headed until we got there. The only thing the officer said to me was, no matter what happens, stay in the faking car. If you see anyone with a gun, call it out on the radio like this. Showed me. If any of us get shot, call it in and stay in the car. Then, he took a deep breath, calmly got out of the car, and took off at a sprint towards a 40-person melee in front of the only strip club in town. We were the first car there. Over the course of the next 30 seconds, officers arrived and kept coming until they outnumbered the people fighting. The officer I was riding with was completely on his own for a 10-second eternity and was able to rip about 10 people apart from fighting before backup arrived. It was the single bravest and most humbling thing I've ever seen with my own eyes. When it was all over, he got back in the car with 3 drunk and beaten up dudes in the back, turned to me and said, "So when you gonna sign up? I've got a couple more stories from that summer doing ride-alongs, if anyone wants to hear." Corrections here. When I was first on the job, I was doing an overtime shift in the maximum security unit. It was my Friday, 1 hour to go, and my birthday weekend at that point at 1400. While counting the minutes, a call comes out on the radio. "Central Control, activate IMS. Housing Unit 3, inmate is refusing to cuff up and has broken the fire sprinklers in his cell. Requesting A-team response. Put B-team on standby." IMS is code for locking down everything. When you hear an IMS call, that means every inmate that is not in a cell must be secured. It's serious shit, because when an event like this occurs, other officers must leave their respective posts to assist, which means officers that remain on their units while their counterparts assist are now even more outnumbered, and that can easily spiral out of control. In short, any event like this is a serious security threat. In this case, Maximum was put on lockdown while the rest of the institution kept about their business. Interesting thing is, when an IMS comes out for Maximum, the collective prison sphincter cinches up a bit, because Maximum is where the real violent shit goes down. And A-team is always the first to respond. But the kicker with this one was the command to put the B-team on standby. This means shit has hit the fan and anyone not immediately supervising inmates would be required to respond if so commanded. A B-team deployment to Maximum would send the rest of the 7,000-bed institution into a complete lockdown. All doctor appointments, visits, movement throughout the buildings is completely locked down. You'd hear Sallyport doors slamming shut everywhere. Really cool to experience it, honestly. There's also C, D, and E teams. If those were ever called, well, it shouldn't ever get to that point. Anyway, being the new guy, I was elected to respond. When I arrived at the briefing area, we were immediately ordered to put on our riot gear and buy our hazard coveralls. Other officers helped us suit up, so no skin was exposed. Only being a few weeks out of the academy, I did sheet myself. This was not only my first A-team response, but it was also a biohazard. Blood, semen, urine, sheet. Which is it, Sergeant? All of them. I don't believe in Jesus, but I did briefly for that moment. When we were escorted onto the unit, it was a war zone. The entire housing unit was full of gas. Fire alarms blaring, red lights flashing everywhere. Even though we had our gas masks on, it didn't help as we had to put them on in a hurry. The first responding officers had to go in without any protective gear. The motherfucker was still in his cell. He had been gassed, maced, and hosed. He was unrelenting. I thought, he's gotta be on PCP. Then I remembered this is Maximum. Nothing gets in or out. The inmate was as naked, covered in God knows what, screaming unintelligibly. He was bleeding from his arms due to having bitten full chunks out of them. His cell was watered down from the sprinklers and from getting sprayed with any number of OC variants. The best part, this man, in all his naked splendor and rage, was 120% erect. The fullest body you've ever seen. Something deep inside his primordial mind had gotten irrevocably turned on through all this. Even his penis being exposed to OC spray did nothing to stop it. We stack up in a line. For cell breaches, 6 of us would line up in a stick. The guy on point always had the shield, 2 to 5 had the cuffs. The last guy was the moderator. He or she would give the inmate a final opportunity to comply, because the pain was faking coming. Inmate, this is your last opportunity to approach the door and cuff up. Do you comply? Of course not. When this inmate saw us line up, however, something changed, as if the Holy Spirit spoke to him. He cuffed up, was dragged out of his cell, still erect by the way, and thrown into a shower. I didn't even get to breach the cell. The sight of 6 officers in full riot gear lining up outside your door, and you knowing full well they're gonna find a way to all fit in your cell in less than 3 seconds, can be a really humbling experience. The endpoint edit. Sorry for the letdown of a conclusion. The reality of these situations is that we have to contain the threat. There are only two outcomes: containment or people getting hurt/killed. I highly recommend the HBO documentary Gladiator Days, which depicts the outrageous violence at the institution I served at. Since this is getting somewhat upvoted, I want to draw attention to the absolute bullshit the men and women in blue have to put up with. Yes, there's bad apples. And yes, they ruin it for the rest of us. But for the vast majority, we derive a strong sense of duty from our jobs. That duty helps us get through the sad human condition we have to mop up regularly. Having worked in a prison, I was tasked with the direct supervision of society's worst, the monsters, the folks you hear about on the news and ask, how could someone do that to another person? To a baby? We have to ensure they're fed, healthy, receiving correspondence, going to dental/medical appointments, getting the religious services they need, bathing, sleeping, etc. And all that while knowing exactly what they did to land themselves in this situation. There are reports called pre-sentence investigations that detail, in absolute grotesque explicit detail, the crimes these people committed. This is the stuff the news doesn't report, because the public couldn't handle it. Not only that, it details their upbringing, which can be equally disturbing, and just faking sad. You see how their upbringing led them to their current plight, and somehow, you have to professionally wade through knowing these things and treat them with as much dignity and respect as possible. It taxes you like nothing most have experienced. Sorry for the soapbox. My uncle told me a story once about getting called on a code swordfish, which is a bit more serious than just all units. There was this coked up 6 feet something huge guy who had just shot up a liquor store and was tearing down the interstate. He told us there were probably about 15 cop cars already tailing him when he caught up, with 2 state troopers leading. When he got onto the interstate, he was practically right next to the guy. They ran his car off the road and the dude jumps out while it's still moving and runs across the interstate. He jumps over the guardrail and falls about 10 feet to the other side of the interstate, runs across that into the woods. The 2 state troopers got out as soon as they saw him running and took off after him with my uncle not far behind. One of them didn't realize how far the fall was and broke his ankle. The other chased down the guy. By the time my uncle got there, the other state trooper was staggered and about to pass out from how hard his ass got kicked. My uncle, without breaking his sprint, charged the guy and threw the heaviest haymaker he could. The guy went out immediately. Later, they had to go to the hospital to file reports, since they had to take the guy in for the drug stuff. My uncle was sitting on a chair, with his hat over his hand in his lap. The doctor comes in and asks him how big of a flashlight did he hit the dude with. My uncle just lifts his hat and shows his bruised and swollen hand. Apparently he hit the guy so hard it fractured his temple and very nearly killed him. Our calls are a little different. Mostly rescues, but we'll sometimes fall in with the local police departments. Once got called for a dirt bike accident on a trail. Story starts out that kid's broken up bad, lost, can't get out of the trail. It's a 7-mile trail and only wide enough for one ATV to get through at a time. All traffic goes one way. None of us live that way, so none of us have a bike with us. And I'm the only one who's ridden the trail. I'm headed to the trailhead while I'm listening to the radio traffic, thinking to myself, you dumb motherfuckers. It's going to be at least 4 hours before we find and drag this kid out of there. Why the hell are you calling in the helicopter? There is no landing zone and they aren't going to wait 4+ hours for you. Local search and rescue faking sheet up. They'll be on 4th fluids within the hour. Helicopter flies through, then leaves. Like big surprise there. Word gets out that another group riding got the kid and are taking him to the highway. Point group actually rides through to the end of the trailhead. Point kid's fine. Nothing broken but his bike. He had earbuds on inside his helmet. When he went down he hit his head hard enough to break off both of the earbuds inside his ears. And I'll never wear earbuds inside my helmet. Point I was off for this one, but the original call is too good. Dispatch call saying there's an alligator eating a person on the river. This is pretty big and one of our worst fears. It'll impact how we manage alligators from then on. We've got to get out there, catch and kill a 12+ foot alligator and recover a body that no one's reported missing. So they all scramble, to get a boat in the water before this thing leaves and goes to sleep for 2 weeks with a full belly and the half-eaten body sinks, and no amount of dragging or side sonar will help find it in the flooded river. Other agencies are getting out there too. They find the alligator. It's eating a dog. So now these guys are cutting up about it. And out of nowhere they notice a freaking body floating in the river. Turns out some guy ran from highway patrol days before, tried to cross the river, drown, and happened to float up at exactly the right time point. I did get to catch the dog eater though Faker made the paper. In all honesty, I think the couple who originally made the call accidentally drowned their pet when the river flooded and the alligator found the carcass later. They were guilt-ridden and needed a scapegoat for their ignorance, and 2 alligators died for it. Because of the media we were forced to remove one. We knew there's no realistic way to get the one who actually ate the dog, so we just had the trapper set a line and remove the first gator over 8 feet that took the bait. As soon as you remove one, another shows up, so this couple sees another big gator and raises hell that we didn't catch the right one. So we set a line for the next one. Comes out just over 11 feet. We're like, for the love of God, just don't see another alligator. People in between these two, I was out with a partner looking for the dog killer. We mostly hook them on rod and reel. Based on the pictures and location we found it, we hooked into it and knew immediately that we would never catch it. This faker pulled an 18-foot boat up a flooded river like it was soggy newspaper. Had us dipping so low we were worried about capsizing. Swam under a log and we kept fighting till the line finally broke. After being under for well over 45 minutes, this thing pops up like 15 feet from us and crawls up onto a fallen tree and sandbar. Starts huffing, trying to get some oxygen back. We're just stunned staring at it like we just pissed off the Lake Placid monster and it's coming for revenge. My partner's been doing this for many years and he says this is the largest gator he's ever seen. The thing was over 13 foot and was still partially submerged. Coloration matched the picture of the dog eater better. This was it, and he's staying on this planet for a while longer. Also, the first and only cavalry charge I've ever seen was in Brooklyn. There was this ride on W12 in Bowery in Coney Island in the late 80s called the Polar Express. You've all seen it. It's that ride that goes really fast around, then it goes backwards while blasting really loud music. Stupid, but whatever. This also attracted every brokies in Brooklyn who couldn't afford to get into a club or were thrown out of all of them on weekends, and it was always a freaking nightmare. There were always fights, but you learned to let them tire themselves out a bit before you waded in, because things could get ugly. I was detailed to this thing with a small army of other rookie cops on 4th of July weekend. We were told in no uncertain terms not to go into the crowd. Ever. Nothing is happening in there that's worth your safety points, so of course a brawl breaks out and someone immediately goes running in. Now please understand, you have to go now. You can't leave the other guy alone, even if he did fuck up. The crowd parts for us like Moses parting the Red Sea, and then it closes in on us and the airmail, rocks, and bottles come sailing. We pretty much go back to back Alabama 300, but we are vastly outnumbered and out inebriated. We are fighting our way out, and there's backup trying to fight its way in to get to us, but it's taking time, man. I don't know if you've ever literally fought for your life, but it is fucking tiring. That adrenaline jolt only buys you so much time. Then I saw it, a flying wedge formation of mounted charging down West 12th into the crowd at full speed with a sergeant in the middle with his nightstick held out like he was ordering a charge and a sheet-eating grin that said he had waited his entire life for this. I think the horse was smiling too. You'll hear the term crash a lot and it's hyperbole. Not here. No, these guys crashed into this riot and sent bodies flying everywhere, like the bow of a great warship cutting through a stormy sea. A blue, black leather and roan battleship. The crowd dispersed in about 3 minutes flat, equally as stunned by what they just saw as honestly the foot cops were. I know sometimes people bitch about the cost of maintaining mounted police units because they are seen as unnecessary backdrop for tourist photos, and oh my god, I'm living proof that they are so much more valuable than that. Late to the thread, but here goes. As with most, not a police officer, I was a boarding officer in the USCG many moons ago. Typical 4-man boat crew on a USCG 41 feet. Early one morning on a normal harbor patrol, I notice a 75 feet motor yacht illegally anchored Given the ship traffic coming and going in the pre-dawn light, it was totally unsafe, so I radioed station and they advised we make contact. I grabbed the searchlight and illuminated the yacht, and when I lit up the guy sleeping on the aft deck in a chair, as soon as my light hit him, he bounced up and ran inside. If only he hadn't done that. This prompted our boat driver at the time to overreact, slamming the throttles forward, hitting the siren/lights, and saying repeatedly over the loudspeaker, "This is the United States Coast Guard. Prepare to be boarded." Of course, now everyone's adrenaline is flowing, and what was just an illegal anchoring situation was now, in the mind of these other three guys, the world's biggest drug bust about to go down. See, the ship had a Mexican registry point, so we come alongside and immediately, make the determination that the ship is too large to be boarded at sea by a 4-man crew, so we escort them back to station. This is the unit's cool part. By the time we get back to station, every single member of my unit plus every crew member on the larger cutters that tied up at the station were all on deck watching. There was another military base nearby with a large police force, so their police were on scene along with the local sheriff's department K9 unit, US Customs, D, and some guys in suits whose affiliation I never was able to figure out. Probably FBI or CGI, who knows. This was literally all hands on deck. A preliminary search of the vessel found a very small quantity of marijuana in the bedside table of the master cabin. There were 3 generations of a Mexican family enjoying their vacation, and it looked like mom and dad might have enjoyed a joint or 2 in the evenings back in their cabin. That's what it looked like to me. To everyone else it looked like the reincarnation of Pablo Escobar. They ripped that yacht apart in the name of space accountability when the overall outside measurement is greater than the total of all the inside compartment measurements, leading one to believe there may be hidden compartments, false bulkheads, etc. They even ripped up the decks with saws thinking there may be something stashed along the keel pipes as a lowly E3, pretty fresh out of boot camp. My part in all of this was armed guard for the family. I stood there with a Beretta 92F on my side and an M16 in my hands guarding grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, and the 3 kids. And as I stood there watching their boat be ripped to shreds over the discovery of a couple of joints, I asked myself, was I really supposed to shoot them if they tried to run or escape? Over a couple of joints and being illegally anchored? The illegal anchoring that I noticed and brought to everyone's attention? I discovered later this boat was not on any of our watch lists and no one ever did find anything. The boat stayed tied up in a nearby marina for a couple months and then just disappeared one day. I'm not sure whatever became of the boat or the family, but I hope they are well. I'll never forget that day. I had such guilt and such remorse for what those poor people endured that I became very disenchanted with my choice to join. I loved the search and rescue part of the CG's mission and I have some great memories of some truly good deeds I got to do for many people. But the law enforcement part stuck in my craw and I was choking on it. So when our wonderful US Congress failed to come up with a budget and we shut down the government briefly, the chief walked into Morning Muster one day and said, "Anyone want out? Come to my office at 1100 hours today for processing to the inactive ready reserve." It was like a dream come true. I got everything I needed out of my time in service and I did some good while I was there. But never again would I find myself hovering over the elderly and children with an automatic weapon, or ruining someone's day/vacation/property/life for a couple of joints, and for that I'm eternally grateful. Not a cop, but had all units on a Air Force base called on me. We were in a hardened aircraft shelter that had vaults in the floor with nukes. We had just installed an engine in a jet, and I had to run it for operational checks. There was also an external tank on the jet that needed empty. So during the run I tried to burn the fuel out of the tank, so we could remove it. The maximum allowable ground run limit unrestrained is 85%. It was the weekend so no one was around to bust me. If I went higher, I get up to 89%, and it's still going slow. The ground guy asked me what I was at. He told me Bill had done 93%. Well, the challenge was laid down. I end up jamming on the brakes and hitting full mill power, 102%. Here's the thing, the vaults had vibration sensors to prevent people from tunneling into the nukes. Next thing I know I look out of the cockpit to see every cop on base in front of the shelter. Now it's loud as fuck in the shelter and these cops are running in with M16s while trying to cover their ears. They are screaming at my ground guy to get me to sheet down. I'm laughing my ass off watching these dudes with guns trying to function with the noise and holding a rifle. So I drop back down to idle and they are screaming for me to shut down. The cooldown period for a high power run is 5 minutes. So I run at idle for every second of the 5 minutes watching these guys suffer the noise of a J129 jet engine. After I shut down they force me out of the cockpit and evacuate us out to 100 meters in front of the shelter. I track down the highest ranking guy to explain why the alarm got set off. A bunch of the cops went to secure and inspect the shelter. I was talking to the guy in charge when one of the noob cops comes running up saying they have a suspicious package. So I asked him what the fuck he is talking about. He said there's a bag next to a giant red box. I asked him if he was talking about my backpack next to the snap-on toolbox. His boss called him an idiot and they all left. Our commander showed up and talked me into never doing that ever faking again and to have a nice faking weekend. TLDR, nuke alarms bring all the boys to the yard. I'm not a police officer, but back when I was a reporter, I had to write up a fun little story for the paper. The local university had a Greek week in which all the frats and sororities would compete for charity. At the end of the week they'd gather together and carpool over to the local drive-in. Normally the campus required any gathering of more than a dozen or so people be registered so that they could send an officer to monitor for underage drinking. But because this wasn't an official party no one bothered to tell the campus police. The plan was to go elsewhere. Sure enough the neighbors complained about an unauthorized party as there were maybe few dozen kids milling about loading up for the carpool. So a couple of the campus police were sent over to move the kids along. When they get there there's kids everywhere and they are talking shit to cops. They thought it was ridiculous that someone called the cops on a carpool. One of the officers then slipped on a beer bottle while walking to the frat house, but his partner didn't see why he had fallen. He heard a crash and sees his senior partner on the ground. Thinking his partner had been hit by a thrown bottle, he rushed over to the cruiser and called in for backup. But he was relatively green and made several little mistakes. Instead of using normal language he decided to use codes. Instead of saying, "Hey, we are clearing out that unauthorized party and could use a couple more officers," he used the codes for riot in progress, officers down on the scene, need immediate backup. And instead of using the campus police only band, they use the shared county band. Well, riot in progress, officers down, is apparently something dispatchers take a little seriously. An all units call was then immediately repeated by the 4 adjacent counties plus most of the individual citizen towns. Ultimately a couple hundred cars screamed their way to campus. Cooler heads eventually prevailed, but not until a few hundred cops from about a dozen departments had donned their anti-riot gear, fired tear gas into a crowd that had no idea that they were rioting, and had detained everyone in a 2-block radius. Without realizing or intending to, the rookie had summoned nearly every officer in a 50-mile radius. No one will probably read this because there are so many comments, but I have a story. I'm not a police officer, but was a nurse at a prison. Every year there is a picnic for the inmates serving life sentences, where they have family that can come in and visit in the yard. One year during the picnic there were approximately 200 people milling about in the yard of the prison when inside the maximum security common room a fight broke out between 2 inmates. When one of the officers came up behind one of the inmates to try and separate them, she kicked backward and hit his shin in just the right place with her prison issue boots and shattered his tibia. One of the other responding officers in the pod called across the radio, "Officer injured, officer down, send everyone." The radios are monitored by the local PD as well in case something serious happens like a riot or hostage situation. So the local PD intercepts this message and sent everyone. I'm serious when I say everyone. There were police officers, federal investigators, ambulances, fire trucks and even Parks Department vehicles responding. At this point there is so much chaos that none of the officers in the central command know what is going on or what the status of the injured officer actually is, so against protocol they throw open the gates and all of these responding officers descend upon the prison. The poor 200 people in the yard were swooped down upon by the literal 100 officers with guns. Fortunately, the situation was cooled down quickly and no one else was injured. But it was so congested with cars, the gates to the prison were wide open with empty police cars left running and unattended. I was actually surprised that not a single inmate tried to take advantage and sneak out, although the prison was on lockdown for the next 24 hours while they tried to complete the investigation and sort out the chaos. If you want to know how screwed up our immigration system is, read the following point. I was a CBP officer for 2 years, so according to someone here I wasn't a real cop, but I nonetheless was in law enforcement. I had a troll recently try to get on my nerves by saying I wasn't a real cop. As someone who went from being a cop to hating law enforcement, I'm fine with that. Anyway, if someone is traveling from certain countries in Europe and Asia, they get a visa waiver. They can visit for up to 3 months on business of pleasure without a visa point. So this dude comes through on visa waiver, and at the time there were 2 different systems to process travelers. One was integrated, and the fingerprints and pictures went into the systems with the passport info at the same time. At the midfield or connections terminal, someone coming to the US, but going on to a different city. We used a system that had 2 programs, where one had fingerprints and picture, or biometrics, and the other processed the passport. You had to wait for the biometrics to come back before you approved the passport. We had this really dumb officer working for us. I don't know how she made it through academy, because she had a partial understanding of English, and from what we gathered, was a mail order bride from some Asian country, might have been Thailand. At some point, rest easy, weary travelers, most CBP officers are far more qualified than she was. We think she knew somebody to get the job, as she was processing a passenger, English or Scottish, can't remember. She didn't let the biometrics finish and admitted him. After the inspection he hit on biometrics, and had a bench warrant in New York City. Everyone available had to search the airport for this guy. About 20 of us ran through the airport looking for him. We thought it was some catastrophic crime point. So the funny part, and I'm gonna likely get downvoted for this, but she had a hard time telling one white person from the other. I know everyone jokes that we think all Asians look alike, but it works vice versa also. And we only had a copy of the bench warrant, not a photo to go by. She sees like 6 different guys she thinks are him, but they are all American. Finally we find the guy and he's very friendly. We ask him about the bench warrant and he says he got in trouble on New York, and they told him it wasn't a big deal. We call the originator of the warrant, after taking the guy back to the inspection area with us, and this is where things got complicated. Point: he had been found high by a cop and pretty much taken in and dismissed. The warrant was for a follow-up court date, but for some reason it wasn't mandatory. It was sort of just there in case he got arrested in New York City, so someone knew there had been previous contact. This was 10 years ago, so if I seem clueless as to how this works, I'm trying to put things back together how they went. So we could have let him go. The issue was that he admitted on his entry form that he had been a drug addict, which is a media denial of entry. We asked him about it, and he said he was on his way to a treatment facility run by Eric Clapton's foundation, and that he had been clean, but thought he might relapse, so his parents footed the bill, so he could stay clean. He had the entire catalog with him, and showed it to us. But we had to deport him. Had he not shown up with the hit, and admitted to being a drug user, we could have let him through. In fact, the supervisor was going to give him a pass, but you can't legally edit an entry document once it's been stamped with an entry stamp. Point: we told the guy he had to deport him, and he just smiled, and was like, okay, can I get a bite to eat? He didn't even seem bothered. We told him he could come back with a B1/B2 visa, and he said he'd apply as soon as he got home. He said, it's just a bump in the road. I'd rather go through this clean than go through anything I went through the past few years. I know it may sound wrong, but I wish he had gotten away. It was her fuck up that caught him, and we scrambled to catch a guy who was just trying to better himself. I still think about this guy, and it really made me think about how I felt about drug addiction at the time. The guy's attitude told us he couldn't be defeated, and I totally respected that point. Now, in fairness, he should have done his research and gotten a visa. You can get a visa with his history, especially for medical reason. We just admit so many people who are dirtbags that it shames me. We had to send a decent guy home. Too many. But one that stands out is an officer down call. Point: it was a very slow night. One officer was at the hospital sitting on a suspect, some of us were at the station, and one unit was on a traffic stop. He'd taken a long time and dispatch status checked him. He said he was fine. This particular office we were sitting in, you can hear the 911 line ringing very loudly. All of a sudden, both the 911 lines and non-emergency landlines go insane. Then I hear it over the radio. Officer down. Officer down. X and Y Street. Units code 3. Officer down. What happened after that is sort of a blur, but we jumped in our cars and flew 100 miles per hour. The neighboring agency, which is very large, occasionally receives our 911 calls too. There is no hyperbole when I say their entire division responded. Plus 15 cars, over 50 officers. They were amazing in their assistance and care for us. I was first on scene. I saw a ring of people standing over something and staring down. I politely told them to move and saw my friend lying on his back. I did my best to comfort him. Some old lady started praying over him, and I was a dick to her. I feel badly about that one. My friend kept telling me to call his wife and sister and tell her, and I kept telling him he would tell them himself. I knelt down and held his head in my lap. I removed his gun and shield and gave them to my boss. He was okay. The suspect he'd stopped lied to him about his identity and took off. He dragged my friend with his truck and then ran over his ankle, breaking it. He was shipped off to the The rest of that evening was long and stressful. Detectives, administration, crime scene, news reporters, etc. I don't want to give any more details about the suspect, but he was a wanted felon, convicted of sexual assault of 2 children under 10. Through thousands of hours of effort and investigation by us and our brother/sister officers from other agencies, he was caught hiding out in South Texas. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison for what he did to my friend and violating his parole. After that sentence, he was tried in federal court for a felony charge and received another 20 years in federal prison, non-concurrent. Anyway, my friend is better and back to work. That night was one of the most difficult moments in my career. I can still hear that radio transmission in my head. Officer down. Officer down. X and Y Street. Units code 3. Officer down. I get goosebumps anytime I think about it. Portland police arrest man after alleged Star Wars lightsaber assault at Toys R Us. Updated December 15, 2011. Posted Dec 14, 2011. Police arrested a man who allegedly assaulted 3 people with a blue lightsaber at a Hayden Island Toys R Us Wednesday night. 911. Caller reported the incident about 9:50 p.m. and said the man was inside the store, 1800 Jansen Beach Center, swinging the Star Wars weapon of choice at customers, said Sergeant Pete Simpson, a spokesman for the Portland Police Bureau. While the caller was on the phone, the man then left the store, lightsaber in hand, and walked out to the parking lot. Officers tried to arrest the man, but he kept swinging the lightsaber at them, Simpson said. One tried to use his taser on the suspect, but the device didn't work. Another officer used his taser and made contact, but the man knocked one of the wires away with the lightsaber. The officers finally arrested the man after grabbing him and pinning him to the ground. The suspect, identified only as a 33-year-old Hillsborough man, was treated by medics at the scene and taken to an area hospital for a mental evaluation. He faces several criminal charges after he is evaluated, Simpson said. None of the victims of the lightsaber assault needed medical attention, Simpson said. Well, my dad was a cop. He passed away. We live in a small city, which have a small police detachment. He told me of this one. The city borders the Pan American Highway, so there's always high traffic in the zone. Bear that in mind. Someone tipped the border patrol that a huge convoy of drugs had already passed their zone and is heading to my city, but it's heavily guarded, with watchers, a car with guys that will alert of police blockades and so, oftenly a few miles ahead of the convoy, so the convoy can avoid the cops and grunts, the ones in charge of the safety of the whole thing. For those unknown things of life, the cops were doing a few checkup points on different roads in order to catch tax dodgers, and the watchers got stopped by one of those. One of the guys shot our officer in the chest, punctured lung, survived the shot, and all hell broke loose. The radio went on. Officer down. Dispatch this. Dispatch all. This is a special division like US SWAT, heavy weaponry and SWAT training. Long story short, blockades galore and cops everywhere. Units from more than 2 hours away came up. Things got very tense for a couple of hours. At the end, one of the blockades was able to spot the convoy and all the units moved there. The convoy got detained. 3 wounded cops, 3 grunts died, 2 wounded, and 6 tons of drugs caught. This'll end up buried, but here goes. Former co for a state prison, and I was the reason for the call. We would often work understaffed, as the state doesn't pay as well as counties or municipalities. I was freshly certified, 2011, completed the academy and state certification less than 60 days prior, and I was called by one of the dorms that only had 1 staff member assigned. She had noticed suspicious activity. I grabbed another staff member, female, who had completed the academy even more recently than I, and went down on the wing point. There were too many inmates in a single room. They are not supposed to be inside any room in which they don't reside, so we tossed the extras and made the 2 who stayed in the room sit outside while we searched. Mistake #1. Always handcuff an inmate prior to a search. Go through his property and end up finding a very small implement. Looked like a cartridge from a pen or the hollow stick from a Chupa Chup lollipop with a small bit of razor melted into it, maybe a quarter of a US dime. Inmate claims it's for cleaning between his teeth. I'd seen felon at this point. I know you could mess someone up pretty badly with less. Normally, finding any kind of contraband is automatic lockup, especially a weapon, but I have a touchy lieutenant on that night, the kind who would overturn a lockup because I didn't clear it with him first. I go upstairs and call it in, clear with the LT, and he tells me to escort him to see him, and he'll make the determination. This is where shit goes sideways. I return to the wing, pull my cuffs, and tell the inmates to turn around. Inmate starts flapping his gums about it's my birthday, this is bullshit, blah blah blah. Not hearing it. Tell him to turn around one final time. Before I realize what happened, I'm recovering from being hit in the face, and at this point, have dropped the cuffs on the ground. Mistake #2. I never saw him ball up or swing. I just remember regaining my balance and thinking, did this motherfucker just hit me? A second later, I see him attacking the female officer I was with. I'm still green, and I'm not thinking clearly. I grab the inmate and put him into a headlock. Mistake #3, and not an approved move, not by a long shot, and start punching him in the face. I yell to the female to ask her if she's okay. She's fully engaged and active. She comes over to grab the inmate and attempt to restrain him. At this point, the inmate has decided he's not a fan of my armpit and would like to be free. He turns his head in and bites the fuck out of me. Reflexively, mistake #4, I'll let go of the inmate and gasp in pain. He turns towards the female officer again, who has not been successful in restraining the inmate, and her glasses are in several dozen pieces on the floor. This gives me a moment where the inmate and I aren't sharing a personal bubble. I hit the button on my body alarm, then rip it off. It has a secondary activation where the string in the top of the device becomes dislodged if you remove it from your belt, and hit the red button on my radio, another call for help sign. I find out later that the woman in Thebable, the officer's station, did not know what was going on and did not know we were in trouble until the control room called a zone alarm, something to the effect of there's a body alarm activated in Echo Dorm, Wing 1. These are usually not taken seriously. She saw what was happening, and that was when the emergency was declared. Point back at the situation. He's swinging at the female officer again, and I lock him yet another headlock. I'm a slow learner, this time on the opposite side of my body. I'm punching him in the face and trying to bounce his head off the wall, but the angles in my hold on him are off. It's not having the desired effect. At this point I have an epiphany. Neither of us have deployed chemical agents. Ok. I rip my holster, yank my OK, and begin spraying the inmate. The inmate is in the middle of biting me again. When the spray hits him in the eyes and nose, he lets go and manages to get a good mouthful as well. At this point, we go down and hit the floor. His fight is completely gone, and he wants nothing but for it to be over. I kept the hold until the female officer was able to successfully secure his hands with cuffs. I stood up and was going to begin clearing the wing At that point the internal security officer, who had been performing outside building checks at the time, burst onto the wing and began clearing it out as he ran down to where we were, back of the wing. He was the first person on scene, and he was outside the fence when the call was made. He was 6 feet 4 inches and 400 plus lbs, and ran like a banshee, and beat out all the more fit individuals. We were roomies and best friends, might have had something to do with it. The LT and a few other people showed up. We were ushered off the wing and they began the post-use of force recording. Before the end of the night, the inmate was escorted to medical, spit on the officer transporting him, screamed at the top of his lungs about how he was in Vietnam, and had both of his arms cut off, and that we had treated him unfairly, the whole boot. He was moved from medical to confinement pretty quickly, where he refused to deck and shower. So, they sprayed him again. This time he was naked, so you can probably imagine how that went down. It took them a week to transfer the inmate out. The female officer I was with was related to someone who had been with the department for a long time, had worked many places, and influenced many people. They had to specially handpick a team of people who had never worked with him to transport the inmate. In the meantime, she and I were on outside vehicle patrol for the week. Because he had blood in his mouth when he bit me, I ended up on the cocktail. Thankfully, I can say after 7 years that I'm free of HIV or any other communicable shit. I left corrections in 2015 after making sergeant at a different institution, and am now in it. I make better money, not including OT, but I enjoy the time with my wife, and no computer has ever bitten me, slung their waist at me, or gunned me. TLDR, female officer and I got attacked. Help was called for. My best friend was first on the scene, even though he was out of shape and literally the furthest person away who wasn't at home. Used to be a park ranger in a past life. I was on a event security detail when a couple of patrons started burning out. Being that they were stuck in traffic, and I was near on foot, I went to site. My partner walks around back to get the plates to call it in. Dude sees me approach and throws it in reverse without looking, clips my partner and 2 other patrons. He realizes he has nowhere to reverse to, then tried to flee by driving on the grass out of the park, to which he gets stuck trying to squeeze under a tree. I call in the incident calmly, no one is seriously hurt, and ask for another unit. I go to pull the guy out of the car and arrest him, to which he complies. At this point there are 15 to 20 people crowded around, and we have to get him to a car to transport. He doesn't have a DL or ID, immigrant, has an open container and narcotics. Dude was a slam dunk arrest. But the people around us know his legal status and start hassling us. There is a lot of noise from the patrons screaming in Spanish and other cars burning out now, and the local police are having trouble getting to us because they just got caught up in a TC patron vs patrol car. Our dispatcher hears all of the noise and, knowing the context of the call, loses his composure and calls officer in distress to all agencies. Now this dispatcher, bless his heart, has the nickname of Mom and is a great guy, but that was not necessary. We were fine, just needed another unit to transport. All of a sudden the world descends. 30 plus cars from multiple agencies, a helicopter, watch commanders. We look around and are confused, thinking the other unit is in distress. Anyways, total shit show. We get way more help than we needed, and the guy is booked and car is impounded. We were super embarrassed for what felt like crying wolf to the other agencies. NYPD here. Yeah, I've gotten a few. When they call for all units, it's usually an officer down or officer needs help situation, which is probably the most important call you can get. The first one I ever got was around 2 years ago. Some asshole came up to a marked car and fired off 3 rounds at the passenger. The guy's poor parter was going crazy and was pretty much hysterical when we got there. Unfortunately, the officer in the passenger seat died, and we noticed the driver had also been shot in the hip, but he just didn't notice because of the adrenaline. Just remember hearing the guy screaming, holy faking shit, he shot him. He shot my partner and stuff like that. We could gotten the sooner if the guy wasn't screaming, so we couldn't hear the dispatcher. It took like 2 minutes to get a location, then the dispatcher called all units. Officer down, location. One I had recently though was a man shot his wife then himself, but the neighbors heard it, so we were responding to a shots fired call, and we had to clear the house. So it was like 2 to 3 minutes of terror because we expecting a guy to be barricaded and ready for us. So we were expecting him to be shooting through the walls or something. But eventually we finished the sweep and found both bodies. So we just called in 10 to 52, need ambulance, for the asshole that killed his wife because he botched his suicide and Liv just saw the faker laying there twitching. I almost felt bad for him. Anyway, I tell you about the shooting I've personally been involved in, but I don't think I'm allowed to. I interned at a small local PD in college. The total force was only about 15 officers, including supervisors. I was riding with one of the usual officers on our way to a local pizza place to pick up dinner for everyone working that night. We were on our way home when we hear the dispatcher come over the radio, "All units, return to HQ immediately," followed by garbled noise and static. We could hear screaming in the background. My officer comes over the radio, "Dispatch, this is 5 to 11. Can you repeat? What is your status?" There was another 30 seconds of silence followed by 5:11. "She's gained access to the building. Our supervisor was transporting a mentally ill female to the hospital from a prior call we just cleared and heard the chatter on the radio. He was unable to go code 3, lights and sirens, due to his transport, so he radioed to all nearby town departments and state police that all units needed to proceed to our HQ for an unknown incident point. We were about 5 miles away and driving down the center line of the road going about 105 miles per hour, full lights and sirens. We finally arrive at headquarters as the first ones on scene, charge inside with weapons, drawn to find a 16-year-old girl crying that her father hit her. Somehow she gained access past the secure doors and was talking to the dispatcher. 3 minutes later, 4 state police units show up and about 10 other units from neighboring towns. They thought our headquarters was being full-on assaulted/breached. Her father ended up being a corrections officer. No evidence of domestic abuse taking place. She was mad that he wouldn't let her leave the house to hang out with her friends, so she drove to the police station and falsely accused him of domestic abuse. I work for a fairly small agency, and these calls, like the comments mention, are fairly common. The absolute best one I was a part of was basically a scene from the Police Academy movies. I was in the middle of my FTO, field training, process for this agency. Dispatch calls out an in-progress hostage situation at a small duplex apartment. It was right around shift change, so we were all at the station briefing, sheet talking, and getting ready to either start or end our day. Everyone rushes out the door, gets in a vehicle, and drives to the gate that takes forever to open. I was the last car in a line of about 10. The gate finally opens, and it's on point. It only takes about a minute before the first car approaches the complex. At that exact time, the dispatcher decides to read back the location, but this time mixed up the numbers and provided an address to a dirt lot that's about a block south on the same street. The first car flips around and hauls us back down the street. I'm in the back watching everyone as they flip and follow the first car. Lucky for me, I was just at this place and knew the dispatcher messed it up. My FTO knew the town well and also knew the dispatcher made an error. We tried to advise the other cars as they were driving back the other way, but the dispatcher wouldn't get off the radio, so we couldn't. Just as we parked near the complex and were getting out of our vehicle, we watched as everyone else realized their mistake. Starting with the first car, they flipped around, one after the other, and raced back our way. We handled business, then I made sure to play some clown car music for everyone when we got back to the PD. Haha, morons. If there are any aspiring officers out there, just remember, don't rely on the guy in front of you to know where he's going. Volunteer here. A guy and his girlfriend find out that they are pregnant. They are still in high school and freak out. They decide to commit suicide by stealing his dad's gun. Guns are incredibly hard to obtain here. His dad had a license and they stole it out of the safe. They post a suicide letter on the Facebook page of a major news channel and the admins report it to the police. There were searches for them all night, and it turns out that they had a change of heart at one point. It seems the girl convinced the guy, and they decided to drive back towards their town. On the way, on a winding mountain road, they happened to cross paths with a patrol car that was searching for them. They were driving pretty quickly it seems, and they swerved and hit the barrier as they rounded the bend and saw the police car. At the time the officers had no idea that this was the guy they were looking for, but as they approached the car he started threatening them and his girlfriend that he'd shoot. As he was waving his gun around, he, apparently, in retrospect, fired a round that grazed one of the officers' head. In real time they thought he'd been shot in the head. I was on a patrol about 10 minutes away and heard them calling in about the car and then immediately for backup saying that they were getting shot at with one head wound. We were the second car on the scene. The officer was taken to the hospital and was fine. The girl was alive and safe, but the guy was killed in the firefight point. That was definitely one very hectic night. This whole thing also made the news and my wife, girlfriend at the time, happened to be awake at 3 AM and saw the initial report of a wounded police officer in the area I serve on the news and tried reaching me, but my phone was on silent and I was too busy to notice 8 missed calls. She wasn't pleased to say the least. Not a police officer, but I was part of the reason a call like this went out. I was driving back to Detroit from Vancouver, and we were on I-94 in either Minnesota or Wisconsin. This was over a decade ago, and we were Iron Manning the drive. I'm lucky my memory doesn't think it happened on Mars. Being from Michigan, my average freeway speed is about 85 miles per hour. That's 136 kilometers per hour for you international types. So I've got the cruise locked in, and I'm just driving along. A few other cars decide this is too clean and boring a landscape to drive the speed limit through, so they join in, and we've got a pack of maybe 5 cars all just cruising along. Then we see a cop on the median. Well, we see the dust cloud from him having pulled into one of those freeway turnarounds at speed before we see him. Alright. Kick off the cruise, downshift to engine brake, so he doesn't see the taillights or the front end dip, so maybe we look like we're just normal traffic caught up in the pack. I don't know if he wasn't prepared for the pack to be there right when he got settled or what, but he didn't pull out. We figure all's well and just keep tooling along, albeit a fair chunk closer to the speed limit point. Then we see the next cop about a quarter mile down the road, and another, and another. All said and done, over the course of the next 2 to 3 miles we saw over a dozen cop cars on the freeway, under bridges, waiting on exits/entrances. Basically everywhere they could fit a cop car, there was at least one. Couple local departments, a county cop, and at least a couple state troopers. My buddy fires up his police scanner app on his phone, and we hear them on the lookout for the pack of cars driving way too fast to be safe. Apparently, people in Podunk, MN/WI area are just terrified to bits about a little speeding. Who knew? We kept it just a few above the speed limit until we hit the next state line. I guess there's not a lot of crime going on there, so I can't really feel like they were wasting time on us while there was real police work to do, but it still seems like a bit of a silly thing to call out that many officers for. I'm a video journalist in a large-ish Canadian city. We had a terrorist incident a while back. Police officer was hit by a car and then stabbed. I was off when it happened, but the station put out an all call for whoever was able to respond that night to cover the developing events. 20 minutes after I get the call from our assignment desk, I'm in my truck and fire up the scanner and start blocking off the M's and fire channels, so all I hear is police. It's a constant stream of information, easily 50 different voices all giving orders and offering information. I'm following up on mostly dead-end Twitter comments. You do what the assignment desk assigns you. When I hear something along the lines of matching vehicle approaching our check stop, quickly followed by suspect just blew through the stop, crossed the bridge, turned right at, don't remember. I glance around and realize I'm less than a block east, sitting at a red light that was just about to turn green, and I hear the second police all call for the night converge on that area, try and head him off before he hits downtown. Light changes, and I just sit there as, no joke, 15 plus police cars go barreling through the intersection ahead of me. Car next to me had been texting me, and the driver looked over at me with the "are you seeing this" sheet look plastered on his face. I spent the next 20 minutes, maybe less, It felt like forever, listening to the second-by-second description as the suspect evaded police, made it downtown, then started hitting pedestrians, cops begging to take him out, and being told it's too dangerous, and the second the suspect turned into a less crowded area police flipped him. The whole time I am desperately trying to evade the resulting traffic jams, field calls from assignment desk, and follow along mentally where everything was happening, so I could catch up. The next hour or two was spent getting screamed at by passerbys for doing my job, and pressing my luck trying to get a shot of the truck on its side/back. Police had a really solid perimeter, but they left a huge section unwatched which let me get close to another officer, who let me get the angle I needed if I would leave the area afterwards. That was a very long weekend, which left me never wanting to experience another night like that again. A couple of weeks ago we had the entire fire department / could have just been multiple brigades, but a lot of firefighters and a lot of trucks respond to our apartment building. We heard our neighbor's smoke alarm going off, and as they pulled up we were like, "Huh, I wonder if they're coming here." We went outside, we have private entry, as they all pull up, and my neighbor says, "Oh fuck, I hope this isn't our fault," and asked me to tell the firefighters that a smoke alarm was going off from cooking, because she was so embarrassed. As they come around looking for the source of a fire and beginning evacuating us, I tell the firefighters and he goes, "Oh fuck," and ran back to the front of the building to tell them. Basically what happened was that 2 smoke alarms went off, 4 false alarms, and the trigger was pulled for them to automatically dispatch. While they asked my partner to go find the maintenance guy who lives right above us, I heard them come over the radio saying that there was a real fire nearby and they needed multiple units to respond to that one. One of my other neighbors asked why so many responded, and one of the firefighters said, "Well, between it being a dead night until now, we didn't want this spreading to other buildings. And in the past millennials have been hard to evacuate." Okay, Mr. Firefighter point. Although a couple weeks later the alarms in the whole building went off, and my partner and I were the only ones to evacuate immediately, so maybe he had a point. I don't know whether anyone will even see this at this point, but here's a different sort of unit situation. I used to work as a security officer. They give you the lamest assignments when you're first starting out, so for a while, I was posted at a summer camp. This camp was set way back in the woods, so between that and the huge amount of food and garbage that the campers left scattered all over the place, we occasionally had problems with bears. Well, one night I was doing my patrols around 2 AM or so, and I noticed one of the doors to the kitchen was open. This was one of those big industrial sized kitchens. I figured somebody snuck in to get a snack or whatever, so I snuck over and got ready to surprise them. Figured I'd catch them in the act for a bit of fun. I rushed through the door quickly and turned my very bright flashlight on, but I didn't see a camper or a counselor. No, I saw a goddamn huge black bear trying to break into one of the coolers where they kept the fruit. This son of a bitch was probably a good 400 to 500 pounds, and he did not appreciate my interrupting his snack time. I immediately lowered my flashlight and slowly backed away to try and give him space, but he started to follow me out the door. I'd gotten probably 50 feet away from the kitchen when he came out the door, but instead of running away, he just turned and sort of eyed me up. I was trying to keep backing away slowly when he began displaying signs of aggression, swaying his head and snorting and laying back his ears and such. I took an aggressive posture, made myself as big as I could, and started yelling and clapping and stomping at him. Usually at this point they'll just run off. They typically only act aggressively if they're scared, and they normally back away if you confront them. Not this dude. He bluff charged at me and continued to act aggressively, so I shined my flashlight directly at his face and tried to make as much noise as I could. Finally he retreated a bit, but then he turned back around and kept watching from a distance. No matter what I tried, I couldn't get him to flee the area. I was afraid some kid might come out of their bunk and end up getting mauled or something, so eventually I had to put out essentially an emergency call. The camp director and the rest of the staff were woken up, and they came down in their jeeps. Believe it or not, even driving toward this goddamn bear in a jeep, with super bright banjo lights and the horn blaring, didn't really faze him. He would waddle away a few yards and then turn back to watch us again. We ultimately had to call the game warden and keep all the kids and counselors inside their bunks until the warden could come and trap the bear to move him to a different area. I encountered a lot of black bears in my time there and many more around my house where I live, and I've never seen one act like that. Usually the old adage that they're more afraid of you than you are of them is true, and they'll run off pretty easily. Not so with that bear. Just a civilian who stumbled upon an all-call scene, but traffic was backed up for as far as I could see going through town heading to Knoxville, Tennessee. I was impatient and didn't know why, and was arguably in a jackass type mood. I knew the area pretty well and knew a side road that looped back to TGE Main Road, and the side road looked clear. I took it and drove an empty road thinking I'm so clever. I'm going to pop out at the end of this traffic jam and get what I want done today. Yay. I popped out the other side after 5 minutes of ghostly empty side road to a bad scene. Like probably the worst scene in my life. I saw helicopters coming down to airlift people to the hospital, a dozen or more officer vehicles both attending to the scene and blocking traffic, and a few bodies. Some of those bodies were not intact, missing limbs like toys you pop the arm and leg off, or meat in a cheese grater. You ever have an inflatable pool as a kid? Fill it with blood and empty that pool across concrete to look at how the concrete doesn't soak anything and makes it roll until a thin layer covers a wide area, and just know it's from an oh-shit person haunts me. I had 3 officers sprint towards my car as I came from the off-ramp, and I was so stunned and scared I just put it in park and threw my hands up. They couldn't figure out where I came from or how I got through their block, and heard them argue and say they just don't have any more cars to block the roads. I was turned around, sent back to my destination. Plans were cancelled that day. The next day my wife was excited to go to Knoxville, and I became pale and quiet as I drove right over where multiple people either died or were maimed for life. I didn't tell her what happened until later, after we had our fun. Not a cop, but had an all units call to my own house once. Here's what happened. I'd just moved to a rural area. Out my kitchen window I see a man in all camo running through my yard with a rifle. This obviously alarms me, but I know there are a lot of folks who hunt in the area. Figured he got lost or whatever and try to relax. Still, the city girl in me thinks check all the locks. I get to the basement door and there's the guy, like 6 or 7 feet from the door, coming straight towards me. I think okay, obviously not cutting through, and simultaneously realize that it's not hunting season. Lock that door in a hot second, drop and freaking alligator crawl to the steps. Up the steps, ducking under windows, like I'm seriously about to get murdered. What the fuck was I thinking? Moving to the backwoods. I get 911 on the phone and am whispering to PAR dispatcher, who is very obviously as panicked as I am. The dispatcher actually says at one point certainly sounds like he's dressed for the occasion, and of course I think the occasion is my murder. Oh my god, oh my god. I can see the guy's shadow creeping by, looking in my windows, and of course I live 20 minutes away from any police etc. And I remember I left the goddamn garage open and immediately hear a commotion on that side of the house, followed by a shot. I think I'm done for, and the 911 guy clearly agrees. I peek over the windowsill and see like a dozen cops Dukes of Hazzard it onto my lawn. Cavalry has arrived. Great. They're obviously as adrenaline pumped as I am, thinking some madman murderer is on the loose. I'm expecting a full-on shootout, suicide by cop or something. The cops all simultaneously erupt into fits of laughter. One yells, "Oh, it's just Ricky." Now I'm confused. Is this some Texas Chainsaw shit and the cops are in on it? Then I see about 30 chickens run by. TLDR. Sick fox chased neighbor's chickens into my garage. Neighbor tried to warn me, and I assumed him to be a crazed murderer. He shot said fox and I almost got him killed in a hail of gunfire. I worked private security, think a cross between Paul Blart and Patrick Swayze depending on the situation, and worked side by side with off-duty cops to keep the peace. Well, one night we are ushering people out of the bars at bar close and down to either the parking garage in their cars or out to the cab stand as we normally did at bar close. So I go upstairs of the main building to check the restrooms and make sure there aren't any stragglers, and when I came out of the john I'm hearing a commotion emanating from the stairwell below me. My radio is quiet, but there's definitely something going on. So I mic up and ask if anybody has eyes on a disturbance down in the parking levels, and at first I get no response, and then my mic just explodes with noise and about blew my eardrum out, but I could make out somebody hollering for help. So I tore down the stairs and out into the garage where two of my comrades are trying to hold a perimeter around one large black guy that about 15 women are trying to just faking kill for some reason. Well, my friends are doing their best, but they are getting knocked around, and I was about to jump in when I remember that our dispatch hadn't said a word in a good chunk of time, and then I realized that they may not have got the call out when the sheet hit the fan. So I quickly radio dispatch and told the officer that we had 20 plus persons involved in a huge domestic and to get police response down through the second level entrance so they could drive straight up to us. The dispatcher came back, but I didn't wait for him to respond before I waded in and started grabbing people and extricating them from the fight with as little force as I could, while still getting the point across that this was not happening anymore. So we do our best, but we are not controlling the situation, and finally I see a line of like 9-10 police cruisers come screeching into the garage and stopping all around us with cops out of them before they've even completely stopped. They quickly move in, and by this point most of the women have backed off, but a few incredibly inebriated women are still flailing away, and the cops physically restrain them. So one of the OIC/supervisors of the local PD asks what happened, and our security OIC tells him he's not sure. We happened upon these women attacking this man and we jumped in to try and stop it, but he said he didn't know what caused the fight. Well, all at once like 5 of the women start yelling again about how the guy had hit his girlfriend across the face as they were getting off the elevator. He thought they were alone down there, but just as his elevator opened up and he slapped his girlfriend, the 2 elevators directly across from them opened at the same time with about 15 intoxicated members of a bachelorette party, and they saw it point blank and immediately proceeded to try and faking kill him. The cops have to start yelling again to get them to shut up so he can ask the girl who was actually hit if that was indeed what happened and if she wanted to press charges. The girl had been sitting down against the wall the whole time the brawl was happening, and I didn't even notice her until they pointed her out. She said she didn't want to press charges and that she just wanted to go home with her boyfriend. And that set the bachelorette party off again, and they run at the guy and we have to jump in again and stop them. Finally we get them to back off, and we are trying to get them to go to the cars and just leave, as they can't arrest the guy if she won't press charges, or at the very least give a statement of what actually happened. Well, all of the girls but to slowly start walking to their cars, but the 2 remaining aren't having it. They are screaming at the top of their lungs and getting right in the cop's face, and then one of them gestures drunkenly and sorta smacks the cop in the face, and that was it. He spun her around like a record and slapped cuffs on her and hauled her away. She was the only person arrested that night. So it took us until almost 4 to finally close everything down, and then we had to stay writing reports until almost 8 AM. But during the report process we went to go pull video footage from our CCTV cams, and it took us a bit, but we finally found a good angle, and we got a good education as to why they went faking ballistic. The 2 of them were just standing there conversing, and then you see his hand go up and come down, and she flies out of the now open elevator door and eats pavement hard. I mean, he slapped the faking sheet out of her, and I have no doubt she had to have sustained a concussion with as hard as she hit her head going down. Not a police officer, but have witnessed firsthand an all units call to in one night. Technically, I was working security at a nightclub where we basically had a huge brawl every single Saturday night. On this particular night a fight broke out between one of our own security guys and a group of coked up off-duty police officers. The fight actually broke out away from the club, at the end of the parking lot at the end of the night, when we had already cleared out the club. Nearly everyone's radio was off, except one point. Over the radio you could hear yelling and someone screaming for help. All 20 or so of us realized it was the one security guy we worked with who was missing. We all bolted a quarter-mile up through the parking lot to find the security guy, and one of the off-duty cops rumbling. It was 20 bouncers on one side and about 25 to 30 off-duty cops on the other, with these 2 monsters scrapping in the middle. One of the off-duty cops didn't like seeing his buddy getting his ass beat and decided to be the third man in. All hell broke loose. Point bloody noses, ripped shirts, unconscious people everywhere within 30 seconds. Out of nowhere, there is a flood of lighters. Close to 20 cop cars come screaming into the parking lot. Apparently when we went to run outside to help our buddy, the owner of the nightclub's friend, who was also a cop, called in that it was very likely that a big fight was about to break out and they should send everyone they have available over immediately. The cops rolled in and absolutely surrounded us, got on the loudspeaker, and told everyone to lay the fact down before they got gassed/tased. It was like riot cops breaking up a prison brawl. 2 minutes later and everyone is separated. Many people are in handcuffs, and a few are being picked up and loaded into ambulances. We dealt with a bunch of legal bullshit for the next few years. The off-duty cops tried to get the club shut down and all of us sued, but there was some pretty damning evidence of 20 plus cops watching another cop fight with a civilian instead of breaking it up, and many of them got fired/suspended without pay. I've responded to many in nearly 15 years service so far. Some of them stick in my mind more than others. One was the big riots that hit the UK a few years back. We ended up doing many hours in flammable riot gear, balaclavas, helmets, and shields. I was hit with a lot of missiles as were my colleagues, but we took the streets back and kept the city safe. For a few weeks after this people would thank us in the street, although it's all forgotten now. I've responded to a terrorist attack sadly too. I was there within the first wave of cops. Saw some horrific sights that will never leave me, but along with everyone else we got the job done, evacuating the wounded and everyone else, while securing the scene where the dead lay. I cried when I got home, and was thankful to have someone waiting for me to come home to. I never told them everything about that night and I never expected to see such a sight as a police officer. Some of my colleagues sadly were very badly affected and had to have time off and quite a lot of treatment. And yet I've never felt prouder of how everyone got the job done at the time. Leaving the personal feelings out until later, it's sad because it takes a horrible event and people to be in absolute fear for them to appreciate their police force. Men and women serve their country and protect their fellow citizens every day, but until the worst happens very few people realize or care. Thankfully I don't know a single cop who does it for the thanks or appreciation. I'm proud to have the opportunity to help people in those situations and I very much believe in every single thing we do. Not a police officer, but I have been on the other side of a all units call. This was back in the 80s. My mom was dating this guy that had a ton of side jobs and night security gig. My mom would go back and forth on if I was okay to stay home alone and not okay to stay home alone. She was on one of her not cycles, no babysitter available, both are working, so I get to tag along with this guy on his janitor job. It was a Sunday, and it was cleaning a smaller local bank branch. This actually happened on the third tag along in a row. Usually there were others with us, but some scheduling thing, and he was stuck at the branch alone. So we are cleaning, me being 8,9 I help here, and they're especially getting under the desks and counters. It may have been me, we had no way to tell exactly who, but one of us tripped the silent alarm, and we exit the bank to a parking lot full of cops. We were cuffed. I was made to sit on a curb while they questioned my mom's boyfriend. Eventually the bank manager and the cleaning company manager show up. No one would speak to me beyond just yelling at me to stay on the curb. Mom's boyfriend was begging to at least be able to speak to me a little bit, and denied each time. The stress and the cuffs triggered an asthma attack, so the paramedics had to be called. Then we had to go to the station for a fuck ton of paperwork. Again I was left to sit in a chair all alone, with no clear idea what the fuck was going on. From my perspective we went from vacuuming at the end to being bum rushed by the police. Police dispatcher here. They happen with some regularity, but there's different levels to it. There's all units in the area, which would be for example for someone with a gun threatening to shoot, so they have to surround the house. Depending on the jurisdiction you could get anywhere from 6 to 12 officers on this. More if it becomes a prolonged incident. This is by far the most frequent, happening maybe every couple weeks, unfortunately. There's all units for a jurisdiction, and, for some of our smaller departments, a neighboring jurisdiction or the county sheriffs too, which might be an officer involved shooting, either at or by the officer, a pursuit, something like that. Most memorably for me, I had a neighboring county call for a chase they were having near our border that ended with a crash and the suspects shooting at their deputies. I literally came on the radio and said what was happening, then said I have put every available officer on the job. If you are not responding, please tell the admin channel. Spoiler alert, no one wasn't responding. This one will get more like 10 to 20 officers on it. This sort of thing is much less frequent, maybe a couple times a year. Then there's faking everyone that can hear this radio, which is fortunately extremely rare. The last time I remember that happening was Christmas 2012, and literally every jurisdiction in our entire county sent police there, 9 police departments, the county sheriffs, and the state troopers. I couldn't tell you how many actual officers. Honestly, I pray I'll never have to see a card like that again for the rest of my career. Not in law enforcement, but have been in very close proximity to a couple of calls. The first, I happened to be in an upper floor hotel room during an incident. Started off with a coup of backfires that got our attention, followed by seeing a squad car racing down a main drag, making turn and coming to a screeching halt. A couple of blocks later there was a burst of gunfire, and in what seemed like a matter of seconds units were flooding in from literally every direction. The firefight went on for about 20 minutes, with all the units and officers clustered around a central point. Turns out it was one guy, loaded for bear, and wearing body armor and a helmet. Unfortunately, the first officer on the scene was killed almost immediately in the first exchange. This was almost 20 years ago, and resulted in almost unanimous agreement officers should be better armed, as they were shortly thereafter. The second time was when a downtown bank was robbed at one of its freight areas during a drop-off. Officers on foot, and in units everywhere. Some actually driving the wrong way up one-way streets at speed. TLDR, an officer down, and a bank robbery both resulted in immediate and massive responses. For what people consider all units in my department, we call it a backup. My partner and I got a radio call of a 415 group hanging out on the corner near Venice High School. 415 group is just another way to say a group loitering, and the person who called it in described them as possible gang members from V13, which is a Hispanic gang near Venice Beach. So my partner and I approach, and there are about 4 to 5 guys hanging out. One had a beer. Seemed simple enough. As we got closer and the group noticed us, of course they all scattered. The one that caught our eye headed down, and Alien made sure to grab the waist of his pants while he ran. This meant he possibly had a gun. Normally when people run and are holding their pants up from sagging, they hold the sides of their waist or the pants legs themselves. My partner and I give chase, which immediately requires us to broadcast a backup per our policy. As we give chase and order the guy to stop, he reaches in his waistband area, tosses an object into a backyard and keep running. We continue to chase and call out the location to direct fellow officers. Our helicopter arrives on scene and watches him run into a backyard, then break into a residence. At this time we surround the house and put an outer perimeter. Since he broke into the residence and refused to come out, we now have barricaded suspect situation. Though we saw him possibly toss one gun already, the training says, if there's one gun, treat it like they have more. So we have to call SWAT and K9. After a few hours of the guy refusing to surrender, the dog goes in and chases him out of the house before biting a decent chunk out of his butt. He's finally taken into custody and fellow officers recover the object he tossed into the other backyard, which turned out to be a fully loaded .45 caliber Smith & Wesson semi-auto pistol. What a rush. Unfortunately, when he took a plea deal and the judge gave him probation, since he wasn't a documented gang member and didn't have a record, which means he just hadn't been caught until we finally did catch him. I'm not a cop, but I had to make an incident that seemed to bring the entire police department in my city. My wife and I woke up at 2 AM one night and heard voices coming from inside our townhouse. We were sleeping on the second floor. I stopped for a second and listened. It sounded like people just talking very loudly. So I went and peeked downstairs from the top landing. There was a younger guy, maybe 30, and an older woman, like 60, standing in my kitchen just talking. One of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Anyway, I yelled downstairs, "What the fuck are you doing here?" The young guy shouts, "This is her house." I yelled back, "No, this is my house." The young guy was screaming, "Sorry, I'm sorry, we are leaving." He tried to grab the old lady and drag her out, but she wouldn't leave. Finally they left after a couple minutes. I locked the door and went back upstairs. My wife was like, "Who the hell was that?" I was like, "Just some drunks that were in the wrong townhouse. Townhouses do all look very similar." She's like, "Well, I'm calling the cops anyway. What if they break into another one and something happens?" She calls 911, and within 90 seconds 4 cops show up. One of them had a faking machine gun drawn. 2 minutes later my house is surrounded. I was talking to the dispatcher and she told me to go, let the cops in. I talked to one of them, pointed in the direction that the drunks went to wait. They had to do a sweep of my house. There were at least 15 cops in my house and another 20 outside. I never saw so many cops in my life. They found the drunks and arrested them. It was actually funny, all the stuff that happened in the chaos. After it was resolved, I was giving my statement to one of the cops and I asked him, "Why are there so many cops here?" He told me that a breaking and entry while the homeowner is home is one of the most serious calls that the police have. I guess that it has the highest likelihood of extreme violence, so they send every single available cop in the area. I will say that I was extremely impressed by how fast those cops showed up. Felt like I had the entire police force in my yard within 4 minutes. Not police. Security supervisor at a large LA mall. The main electrical room in the parking lot blew up. Door came off the hinges. Fire sprinklers went on. All the mall's power went off. Emergency generator came online. The parking valets 30 feet from the room panicked, but weren't hurt. I heard the explosion and had all my officers respond to the area while we blocked off everything like the escalator to the lot. The stores in the 13 auditorium movie theater shut down and people poured out into the mall. It was pure chaos. I found the fire stand for the electrical room and managed to shut off the sprinklers, but not before there was a foot of water in the electrical room. My dispatcher called LAPD, LA Fire Department, LA Department of Water and Power, the AMCO parking management, because 1,000 people were trying to exit at once, mall management, and literally all the security upper management in SoCal. The LAFD refused to enter the electric room due to the water and may be dying from electrocution. LA DWP did a great job though. It took about 10 officers, 4 security supervisors, 10 or 12 firemen, 5 LADWP guys, our head mall engineer, 3 parking managers, and 3 or 4 mall managers 2 hours to get the situation under control. We had to reassure 100 customers that no, it wasn't a bomb exploding in the parking lot. It was only the main electrical room blowing up. Ha ha ha. The mall manager was fired a few days later because our security company had documented that he'd been notified many times in the previous month by the engineering and security department that a bus bar in the electrical room was breaking down and needed to be replaced. What a night. FWIW. My officers and I never got even an attaboy from my security company or mall management for handling that emergency. I quit that job a year later. As a teenager on summer break, a friend and I got bored and started walking the neighborhood. We ended up in a small business park at around 6:30 p.m. and it was empty. One of the business had an old beat up Porsche-like car and we decided that its windows should be broken, so we threw rocks through the windows. Then we started climbing on the roofs of the buildings just for fun. That's when we saw a police car coming down the only road in and out of the business park. We ran and jumped the fence between my neighborhood and the business park and started walking home. That's when we saw a second police car coming through the neighborhood. So we hid behind some bushes. Second police drove past. We came out and kept walking. That's when second police starts driving back towards us extremely fast. Slams on the brakes in front of us. Don't faking move. He grabs me, throws me over the hood of his car, then grabs my friend and does the same. I got 2 of them. He radioed. Then he put us in the car and drove the long way around to the business park. When we got back into the business park there were literally 10 to 13 different police vehicles ranging from the city I lived in, the sheriffs of the county, the neighboring city, and a city about 10 miles away. They kept asking where the rest were and where our truck was and other questions like that. Turns out whoever called thought one of the warehouses was getting robbed because they heard glass break and loud banging. It was really just two 13 to 14 year olds dicking around. The dude who owned the Porsche-like car even tried suing for repairs when the car had probably been sitting there for years. Recently responded to a call, medic, for a quadruple vehicle rollover. Notes kept rolling in from dispatch about the potential patients. Caller describing agonal resps, multiple people thrown from vehicle, man having seizure on pavement, child unresponsive in car seat. Probably 15 comments describing a pretty graphic scene. Now I live in a city, and we cover 1.2 million people, and, thanks to budget issues, we normally only have anywhere from 0 to 6 ambulances on the road available to respond at any given time. We were dispatched. The call was 30 minutes distance through the city away on a highway that feeds in. 10 minutes into the call another ambulance is attached to the call. Still no fire assistance because the call was just outside of the city limits, so city rescue won't respond. We notify helicopter service to be on standby prior to arriving on scene because they can likely take someone off our hands. We find the flag location market on mobile mapping. No one. Another update comment, caller can hear sirens. We drive around in big circles down access roads, cut through fields. Second ambulance shows up and starts double checking. Last update comment, all units stand down. Call is a training event called in by nursing homes. Apparently someone clicked the wrong button somewhere. Not really, and all units respond, but thanks to bureaucracy no city fire was dispatched. Despite always having 10 plus trucks available, no city police dispatched, and the last 2 ambulances were sent. We were pretty annoyed to say the least. We were discussing our plan of attack and preparing for the worst call of our lives. As soon as we were cleared we were immediately dispatched for something non-life threatening on the opposite end of the city. There's a couple posts here of people saying it happens all the time. My guess would be those are smaller agencies. I work at a medium-sized agency in the Phoenix area, about 400 sworn officers. I've been on to calls that qualify. Both were kicked out over the errors. A 999, which is officer needs emergency help. Subject with a gun. Large fights. Sure, you'll pull all the units in your district, but there's still dozens of working cops not responding. First one was a homicide. Early Saturday morning, guy had murdered his parents with a Rambo-style hunting knife, then walked to his grandparents and went to town on them. I've posted about this call elsewhere. 2 units responded with a sergeant. They were met by an elderly woman with a knife still sticking out of her eye, and an elderly man who had been cut to pieces, literally had flesh and muscle tissue hanging from his limbs. There was only about 20 of us on duty in the entire city, so the lieutenant, upper management, called a 999, so we could get everyone. For perspective, the farthest unit that responded was over 40 miles away. This wasn't a real 999. The lieutenant just needed as many units as possible. The other one I went to was legit as fuck. Guy high on meth and heroin said that Satan had told him to sacrifice a soul to him. He rented a room at a Sheetbox hotel and took apart all the furniture. Using the furniture pieces and the bed, he reinforced his room and then called in a bomb threat to his own room, telling the dispatcher he needed help. 2 officers arrived and knocked the door. He intentionally mumbled behind the door so the cops would stand in front of the door and try talking through it to him. Once they moved in front of the door, he opened fire through the door with a revolver and a semi-auto pistol. The 2 officers retreated to cover in the parking lot below. You can't return fire through a door. Long story. The suspect came out of the unit and continued firing. Both officers hunkered down in the parking lot, but they were pinned down by a suspect in an elevated fortified position. The 999 came out. I could hear the gunfire in the background, and the officer calling it sounded terrified. I remember hitting the speed governor on my Crown Vic 136 on a 40 miles per hour city street. We surrounded the place. My boss at the time made it onto a landing across from the guy and was able to get off 4 rounds from his pistol at 50 yards. 3 missed. 1 hit him in the shoulder. He ran and broke perimeter because the officer on the stairs was a coward. She literally told us later that she saw him coming and said, "This isn't worth my life." so she went around the corner and hid. We had about 35 units on scene, and Phoenix loaned us their helicopter. K9 located him, and we took him into custody. He had dropped the guns. When he got shot by my boss, guy got 16 years in prison with a 10-year probation tail, 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and then they charged him with aggravated assault, no weapon, against every other responding officer. Former military police here. I was stationed in Corpus Christi, Texas, and the base was off a confusing freeway exit, so it was very common for lost people to show up at the gate. One boring Saturday morning near the beginning of our shift, my partner and I had only been at the gate for about 10 minutes when a little old 3-seater pickup pulls up. I was still filling out the logbook while my partner talked to the driver. He kept asking the driver for ID or a driver's license, but the driver only spoke Spanish. I figured this might get complicated, so I stopped writing and turned my attention to what was going on. The whole time the driver kept inching forward until finally he just drove off slowly. We watched him for a second to see if he would turn around, but then the truck sped off down the road. So my partner calls over the radio, "We have a gate runner," and tells the other units where the truck turned off the main road. He has me stop the non-existent outbound traffic, and we listen to the radio as our 2 units, with 3 people, try to find the truck. There's a large area on base of old abandoned housing units that hadn't been torn down yet. Only parts of it are surrounded by tall fence, and the whole area isn't maintained at all. The 2 units manage to corral the truck to the fence when it suddenly stops, and a dozen people get out and start running in all directions. Some are climbing the fence, some are trying to go under. One person climbs up a palm tree. The 3 officers do their best to get these people detained. Turns out the driver was a Mexican coyote with 9 Central and South Americans heading to Northern TX. They were thirsty, dirty, smelled terrible, and hadn't eaten in over a week. I almost felt bad when Border Patrol came to pick them up. Back on duty the next day, we hear that a woman saw a man in her backyard drinking from the hose. She tells the next door neighbor, who just happens to be the wife of one of our officers, and he passes that info on to the watch commander. They decide to call everybody in. A whole group of them get to play Call of Duty in the abandoned housing, clearing units all day looking for this guy. But with so much space and grass up to your chest in places, they don't manage to find him. They decide to use every resource we have that night, which isn't much to begin with, and make posts on the hospital roof and the 4 street corners surrounding the housing units. The posts got to wear night vision goggles. Some of them might have had the shotguns out, and we got to ride around in the mules. My friend and I stay for an extra 8 or so hours, but decide to do a walkthrough of the housing area before we call it quits. I still had my weapon on me, so I had it out while we searched, and my partner had his baton point. At one point, we were walking through an area with chest-high grass, and smelled something near a tree. You know that nasty, musky, piss smell you might smell from a vagrant? Well, it smelled like that. The guy had to have just been there, cause the smell was super fresh, the spot was still warm, and the grass was still matted down. Unfortunately, we didn't find him. Apparently, early the next morning, the guy walked in front of a police unit with his hands up. He was covered in any bites, dehydrated, and practically starving to death. He gave himself up so he could get help, and our fun gung-ho weekend came to an anticlimactic end. Okay, so this is gonna sound irrelevant, but bear with me. A few months ago, me and a couple of friends took a tab of acid. I took 2 as I had more experience with the substance than the others that we failed to realize were double dosed. The beginning of the trip was great. We were at a concert, and it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. But once we left, things got bad. Our Uber driver was this 72-year-old Russian man who immediately began hitting on my friend. Let's call her friend 1. I got very uncomfortable and began to panic a little. We eventually got to friend 1's house and I immediately had a nervous breakdown. Keep in mind I'm on 4 tabs of acid. Life as I knew was being torn apart in front of me, and I was absolutely terrified, leading me to break things, become temporarily violent, and run around in my underwear. Eventually, friend 2, and apparently some other person, Called 911 for an ambulance, as they couldn't calm me down. Friend 1 lived around 4 blocks from the police station in a city just outside of Los Angeles, won't say which though, and not even 5 minutes later someone had come to friend 1's house. It was 9 police cars, 2 police vans and 4 fire trucks, but 0 ambulances. I was arrested by 2 officers who pinned me down with their knees, even though the moment I saw them, I lied down as I thought I was going to the hospital for help, and was actually really excited. The charges ended being dropped, and after 2 hours of sitting outside in my underwear at 5 AM, I finally got in an ambulance, and was helped. Apparently, there was no misunderstanding whatsoever, and that was just the way the 911 operator and the local police force decided to deal with a call about one having a panic attack on acid. Direct quote. Oops. I caused one of these by accident as a paramedic. We were going non-emergently to a call where a woman was expressing suicidal ideation. Police were also on their way, but it was shift change for them, and was also non-emergent, because the person was calm, and with family. On our way we crossed over to a different quadrant in our region, which means I need to change 3 different settings to make the radios work properly. My partner and I were chatting on the way, and by accident I only changed 2 settings. This made our truck radio work, but not the portable ones we bring into the house. When we arrived scene we had beaten police, so when I arrived us on the radio I also asked for an eater. I then got out of the truck, turned on my portable, and we walked into the house. Neither of us noticed that our portables were silent. It wasn't a busy night, so it wasn't impossible there were no transmission. We did the call, no issues, and actually had the patient out and in the truck when about 5 cop cars flew in, lights and sirens blaring, along with our tactical commander. When dispatch didn't hear back from us after we asked for an eater, they assumed that something must be wrong, so they called it in as paramedics in distress. All units to police. Luckily it was an accident, no harm done. I got a few sarcastic comments from the cops, who I lit a fire under, and caused a few of them to be late getting home. Oops.